I'm going to go ahead and give you a virtual tour of the Eureka Mining District. It's a bit different from Roberts. It's in a PowerPoint format, and I have some embedded videos. So let's go to the first slide and we'll see how that's going to work. Uh-oh. Okay, welcome to Eureka, Nevada. And that's along the loneliest road in the US, or loneliest road designated by Life magazine in the, I think it was the late 70s or early 80s, I can't remember when. But it's quite a popular area now for people to bike and to motorcycle and to travel. All right, let's go to the next slide.
Dick, I realize that the tech problem is actually my problem, so you want to give me one quick second here. I think I failed to start the deal. There we go.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the embedded videos are going to work. That's good. Eureka is one of the oldest mining districts in Nevada. It was initiated when. That was one of the things I was worried about, Eric. You need to go down to the bar that shows the video of the sound. When you start
Let's try that again. I'm not sure where the setting that you're talking about is.
If you hover on the bottom of the screen, it'll show a dialog box. Okay. This is just a regular slide. So go to 2 slides. I guess maybe it's different on yours. Apologize for that.
Actually, let me try one more thing, if you all don't mind. Can you hear it now?
No.
Perfect. Proceed.
Okay. Eureka is one of the oldest mining districts in Nevada, and it was initiated when silver was discovered by a 5-man prospecting party from nearby Austin of Cornish folks. In 1869, about 3 years after the initial discovery, they located an area called the Ruby Hill, and that was really the start of the real mining activities in the district. The ores were self-fluxing due to the high lead, iron, and silica, and that allowed for local smelting, which eventually led to the nickname in Eureka of the Pittsburgh of the West. Total historic production up until 1964 was 1.65 million ounces of gold, 39 million ounces of silver, 10 billion pounds of lead, and 225 million pounds of zinc. So you can see quite a large producing area. Can you go ahead and advance the next slide? This is the area where the Ruby Hill discovery was made. Gives you an idea of the area, what it looked like. Hasn't really changed probably since the discovery. As we pan around here, we're looking off to the west here. And you'll see coming into view the Ruby Hill Glory Hole, which essentially consists of collapsed mine workings, large gossans stuck out of the side of this hill. However, the travel location for people, this is on the south side of the hill, was on the north side of the hill. So this probably would have attracted people if it hadn't been sooner, if it hadn't been hiding on the back side of this hill from where people walked by. So The main period of production from Ruby Hill was by two different producers, Richmond Mining Company, which was a British company, and speaking of British companies, and the Eureka Consolidated Mining Company, which was financed by San Francisco investors. The area, the narrow gauge Eureka and Palisade Railroad was completed in 1875, connecting the district with the Intercontinental Central Pacific Railroad at the Humboldt River. And the area quickly became a hub for central Nevada mining districts. And by 1878, Eureka was Nevada's second largest city with a population of 9,000 residents. By 1885, production had dropped and the rush was over. All right, next slide. I don't have a whole ton of these videos, but there's a few in the beginning here, and then we kind of go to slides after that. And this is what's left of the old ghost town of Ruby Hill. A couple of stone foundations and houses. Old mine dump, some old adits. I think it's an interesting area of subsidence above some of the old underground workings. There was a large dump here that was hauled away in the 1960s. That counts for all that disturbance you can see. Sort of out in the background, well, there's a really nice, probably the only one out there is this really nice stone building made with a local volcanic rock. Out in the distance, you could see the Ruby Hill operations from Homestake in the 1990s, Archimedes mine. And then that's the FAD shaft. And I think we're going to pan back around one more time. Ruby Hill is what's known in the mining industry as or a geology world as a carbonate replacement deposit. And this is a deposit that forms when hydrothermal fluids interact with the limestone and deposit their metals out. They're massive sulfide bodies, and it's the oxidation by surface waters that creates these big reddish brown gossans that attracted the old timers. All right, let's advance to the next slide. This is what the Ruby Hill area looked like in its heyday. And quite a few buildings and houses. And the next slide shows you what the same exact view looks like from today. The road's still there, and that's about it. Next one. There are a few ramshackle old wooden buildings hanging on for dear life. We're going to talk a little bit about this FAD shaft as we move along in the virtual tour. All right, next slide.
What? No. Mm-hmm.
All right, I wouldn't be a geologist if I didn't put a geology map in this presentation. If you can make it out, there's a purple unit, and then right above that, there's a pink unit that has the numbers 21 and 22 in it. That is Ruby Hill. And if you look right above that number 21, you'll see something called the Ruby Hill Fault that runs northwesterly. The Ruby Hill Fault was recognized early on by one of these famous geologists that Eric mentioned. And it was recognized that that fault downdropped the main ore-bearing horizons down to the north. And in the 1880s, the Locan shaft was sunk to 1,200 feet to search for the mineralization in the hanging wall of the fault. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. This is a cross section of that area. You can see the underground mine workings and the ore bodies that were mined, and then the Ruby Hill Fault, and off in the hanging wall of that fault on the right-hand side of the cross section is the Locan Fault, which was sunk to locate the hanging wall ore bodies. Unfortunately, the water was encountered and it flooded the mine. And according to accounts, the miners barely escaped the torrent, and dewatering efforts in this time frame failed. So on to the next slide. That's the buildings from the Locan shaft back in the 1880s. I haven't been able to locate the shaft yet. I think I have a lead on Lee Rain's brother, who should know where it is, but I think that all signs of the shaft have been eradicated except maybe a hole in the ground. All right, next. There are some pretty nice buildings and structures that do remain, however. This is in the Phoenix mine from the same area. This is taken from along the railroad grade, which they shipped the ore down to Palisade on a narrow gauge. The next shaft shows what this looks like today, or the next slide. And unfortunately, that shows that the shaft has collapsed from heavy snow in 2009. And you can see a trestle going out to some ore bins on the right and the hoist house on the left. And I've got some closer up pictures of some of the stuff. So let's go to the next slide. Here's the hoist house. Next slide. Going to be a few pictures from inside the hoist house. There's the hoist drum and a Caterpillar engine generator from, I'm not sure what time frame that would be, but probably the 30s or 40s, I would guess. Next slide. There's some great stonework at this old mine. This was the foundation for the boilers on the left, and on the right was, I think, the foundation for the assay lab. Next. This is probably the most impressive stonework in the area. This is the footings for the head frame. You can see the collapsed head frame, legs sticking into the air above them. It's a very unique construction for a shaft. I hadn't never really seen this anywhere before. The flat platform-like area you can see was the trestle that was used to take the ore out to the ore bins. And the open space underneath the platform is where the miners would get into the cages to be lowered into the mine. So it's a kind of a two-story head frame arrangement here. But you can just, making out the footings out of that stone is just fantastic stonework. It's quite remarkable. All right, we're gonna move ahead. So there's the ore bins. Unfortunately, it was not the best day for taking some of these photos. The sun was kind of in the right spot to glare on this one, but that's all right. Interestingly enough, these ore bins, as I mentioned, are along the railroad grade, so they could just drop the ore straight into the cars. And then Rob took these photographs for me, and we wandered around and checked a few things out, poked around these old ruins. And this next slide is from underneath these bins. And you can see they had several spools of the flat used to hoist on the hoist for the cars and the ore buckets, and these were in reserve for deepening of the shaft, no doubt. Next. And interestingly enough, these 6-foot long bellows are still sitting underneath those ore bins. He had a couple of spares of those. Quite surprised they're still haven't been taken at this point in time. So next. That's the, as far as I could tell, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct, I believe this is the powder magazine, big sturdy stone building with no windows. So as many people who have ghost towned in various parts of the country have probably found, this is filled with core and samples from geologists' starry-eyed storage of these things that are eventually going to come in handy when we mine this stuff and have to do metallurgy on our samples. But they end up generally just filling up these old buildings. All right, next, please. This is further down along the Ruby Hill Fault. This was the Richmond mine. Next. Unfortunately, the head frame at the Richmond has collapsed as well, but the ore bins are still in pretty good shape. I guess they were built to survive the ages. Next. Rob was quite interested in these old boilers. I think there's 5 of them, and you can see the really nice riveting that they did when they hand built these quite remarkable boilers. Next. Inside the building, which is rapidly disintegrating, is the hoist for the Richmond still. And then go ahead next. And there's the boiler and some flywheels for the hoist as well. That gives you a flavor. There's a few other things in Eureka that are still in various stages of falling apart and getting ruined. But if you want, if you get there and you can wander around a little bit, you can still see a few artifacts here and there. These things are too heavy for people to have stolen at this point in time. Okay, I'm going to go on. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Of course, the ubiquitous carbide tins for the miners' lamps. All right, so this kind of gives you the flavor of some of the area. All right, next slide, please. I'm going to just introduce this quickly, but in 1919, the Ruby Hill Development Company, which was financed mainly by the famous Canadian promoter, Thayer Lindsley, started efforts again to dewater the Locan. Lindsay was said to be in Nevada procuring a divorce in Reno, which was the divorce capital of the world at that time. And they managed to get the Locan dewatered to the 1,200-foot level by 1923 after many difficulties and much expense. Still, the water plagued the efforts, and as a last-ditch effort that they proceeded to take a shot at was drilling an underground drill hole, which caved at the 760 feet below the 1,200 level. So let's go to the next slide. So there, Lindsley came back to Eureka in 1937, and he formed the Eureka Corporation. And they wanted to follow up that drill hole again, and they did some more drilling and intersected ore. And this led to the development of the FAD shaft, named after the claim it was on in 1940. And the mine was stopped in 1943 due to the lack of pumping equipment available during World War II. And so it sort of sat for a while. And then during this time frame, the U.S. Bureau of Mines drilled additional holes, which also encountered ore. A haulage drift was started towards the ore from the 2250 level of the fab shaft in 1948. But once again, water was encountered and could not be managed with the equipment on hand, and the shaft flooded and efforts once again ceased. More drilling was completed in subsequent years, and it was recognized that a major ore body was present. In 1960, a consortium was organized between Newmont Mining Company, Cypress Mines Corporation, and Hecla Mining Company, with the original owners of the area. And in a complex plan to dewater the area, they drilled a pretty wide diameter hole and dumped 24,350 sacks of cement pumped into the area, into the hole to control the water flow. This required a period of 3 months with numerous trucks importing cement from the Elko area. They did actually dewater this area by this Herculean effort, but eventually due to metallurgical issues with the ore, the project was abandoned in 1966. So I have a few slides of this area in more detail. The next slide, please. There's the view of the head frame. There's a pile of dirt you can make out to the right that has some white crusty material on the top of it. And for people that might get out here and look at this someday, and if you wanted to check it out, you can scrounge around on that old mine dump there and find some pretty nice pieces of galena, which is the material that they were gathering for their metallurgical samples. And I think it's the only place I know of in Eureka mining district where any sulfide exists on any of the old mine dumps. So it's down there, but it's a long ways down there. All right, next. You can see these sturdy buildings, the tin coverings getting blown away, but you can see the sturdy construction of the buildings underneath them. And you know, this is another unfortunate effect of this pandemic, was that I had actually arranged for us to visit this site in person and get a tour of the insides of all these old buildings. So unfortunately, that's not going to happen now. All right, next. That's the water tower. And I think that was the Esther house that I was mentioning in that earlier slide. I think a watchman lived there for a long time. Looks like a mine manager's house to me, though, as well. All right, next. So I'm going to switch gears here and go to Eureka. And I'm going to use this opportunity to acknowledge Lee Rain for allowing me to use much of this information. There's a great website. It's www.rainsmarket.com. It's in the program, and it has all of the detailed history of that fab shaft effort and the historic mining activities up at Ruby Hill. It was written by one of the engineers that was on the project, so that's pretty cool. And then in addition to that, there's a walking tour, which I'm going to be utilizing to describe some of the old architectural buildings in town and some of their history. So this is the Sentinel building. This was the Sentinel newspaper, published its first newspaper in 1870. The current building was built in 1879 to replace the newspaper office after one of the town fires destroyed all but its fireproof portion. Interestingly enough, after the fire, the building remained so intensely hot that wet blankets were thrown over the backs of the printers so they could get the next edition of the newspaper out on schedule. This building was constructed at a cost of $10,000 and designed by architect C.M. Bennett. And the Eureka Sentinel continued publication here until 1960. It's now a museum that houses the original equipment and presses of the Eureka Sentinel newspaper. Many of the posters are on the walls date back to the 1880s, and the museum also displays original mining equipment and ledgers, military uniforms, a reconstructed 1880s barbershop, and exhibits depicting life in and exhibits depicting life in the early days of Eureka. Okay, the next one is Colonnade Hotel. This building was erected in 1880 by the Italian Benevolence Society, who held meetings here. By 1880s and into the 1930s, the building was vacant, and it was reopened in the 1940s as a boarding house, continued as a hotel until the turn of the century. Next one, please. This one's interesting. This is a building has a very old Castor motor oil sign painted on the north end of the building, shown in the right-hand slide. And the building was originally a two-story structure that was built in 1879 by an Italian company under the management of Celso Tolli. It served as a saloon. And in a tie back to Jenny's presentation yesterday, was in the saloon that approximately 500 Italian Carbonari formed the Eureka Coal Burners Protective Association in July 1879. And because most of them didn't speak English, they often cheated in the sale of their charcoal to the refineries. She told the story pretty well, but essentially they protested, and eventually an ugly confrontation occurred at Fish Creek when striking coal burners and a local posse exchanged words, then gunshots, and 5 people were killed. 5 burners were killed. Coroner's inquest excused the posse as acting in the line of duty. And the charcoal burners realized the companies had won. They had no choice but to go back to work, and to rub salt in the wound, the companies then lowered the price of charcoal to 26 cents a barrel, a bushel. Okay, next. This is a video, and Bob wanted me to play this. The building was built in 1877 by Tognoni and Company. The Swiss-Italian company consisted of Joseph Tognini, Ferdinando Bonetti, and Gabriele Zonali. It was a billiard hall saloon. Like many other companies in Eureka at the time, this one was one of the largest companies involved in charcoal production. And the adjacent, oh, here goes common sight in Eureka these days. Oh, okay, that's the building to the north. Just a minute. Hang with me. And modern mining equipment. And on it goes today. I think it's pretty fun. Anyway, the building attached to the north, it's just the little square one there, was built in 1924. The front bricks are the same as those used in the construction of the local school. Other portions of this building contain bricks salvaged from the Pinto Mill that was located several miles southeast of town. This building is also the site of the first business establishment in Eureka known as the Pioneer Restaurant, which consisted only of a canvas tent. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is a mural on the side of the building. It was created by Anton de Melle, who based it off an old photograph of local pioneer, Basque shepherder, and rancher James Tutun Iturralde. Abby Sweet and Adeline Callahan completed the mural. And you can also see the star plates on the side of the building that hold the walls of these old buildings together. It's pretty cool, I think. All right, the next one. This is on the other side of the building, and this sign reads 2-pack Palora peaches, a distinct new variety. And I included the movie on the next slide because I think you can read it a little better from the movie that Rob made. So next slide. That was painted in around 1930. All right. Um, Next slide, please. Oh, okay, this was Walt's Western Art Gallery, which was kind of thought it had a neat old sign above it, which says cafe and shop. All right, next slide. This is the present location of the Urban Cowboy Restaurant. This establishment is a combination of two original buildings. The southern part was Brown and Godfrey's Oyster Saloon, Chop House, and Confectionery. It was open 24 hours a day and was the only candy maker in town. During the remodeling of this building in 1994, innumerable oyster shells were found. And if you can imagine that, hauling oysters from San Francisco to Eureka in the 1880s, that's pretty remarkable if you ask me. The northern half of the building was the Knights of Pythias Lodge, a fraternal and benevolent society founded in 1864. On the side is a really nice mural, and I don't have a good picture of it, but it depicts local charcoal ovens and the silver smelting process. All right, next, please. This is the Masonic Building. The American Exchange Building stood on this corner before one of the huge fires in August 1880 when it was destroyed. Inside the building were offices and stores. After the fire, the owner of the property, James Whitten, built the present brick building. Over the next few years, it contained a dry goods store, jewelry store, barber shop, bathhouse, tailor shop, and tinsmith shop. In 1907, a portion of the building was used as the Eureka Post Office. It was noted on October 25th, 1871, Eureka Sentinel, that Postmaster James Whitten, owner of the American Hotel, was building a fireproof cellar under the hotel building. There is a number of underground tunnels in Eureka that go from one side of the street to the other, and there's a number of stories about these old tunnels. Obviously, there's rumors that was used by the Chinese because they weren't allowed to walk around town, and there's other rumors that it was just for storage, and there's other stories about how the winters were so bad that people could walk around and go to different places without having to go outside. In 1872, the Oddfellows bought the old American Hotel building, and the Masonic Lodge received its charter in that year and had its first meetings in the office of Judge J.P. Adams. The Oddfellows met and shared the building as well as a meeting place with the Masons. Later, the Oddfellows membership fell so low that they joined their lodge with the one in Ely and sold the building to the Masonic Eureka Lodge number 16 for $1. Today, the building is believed to be the only underground Masonic temple in use in the United States. The next slide features a movie on the right side of the building there. And Rob pointed out to me, and I hadn't noticed this before, but there's 3 doors and several windows. And I guess the local speculation is that this was actually a crib for the local ladies. And I find that odd that it was in a hotel building, but maybe that's not so odd after all. All right, next slide, please. Here's a repurposed building. This has 3 buildings: the Economy Drug, Rains Market, and the Owls Club. So I'm going to talk about all 3 of these, but I'm probably not going to be able to keep rewinding this over and over again. which is what I was going to do. But the initial building that was the drugstore now was the original site of the first livery stable in Eureka. It was established in the 1870s. The stone building was built here later, but prior to 1873. Housed in it was what was advertised in 1878 as, quote, the corner, the largest and finest saloon in the state. And a fellow named Charles Lautenschlager bought the building in 1879 and promptly tore that one down. And he had just completed a new building when that one burned down in the fire of 1879. He erected the present store building in October of the same year, operated the saloon in front, and the old corner chop house was in the rear. Also housed a brewery at one point, the Eureka Brewery. In the late 1930s, the Farmers and Merchants Bank, founded by Edna Howard Covert Plummer in July 1920, was moved to this location. And Edna's a very interesting person, as she held the distinction of being the first woman in the nation to found a national bank. She was also the first woman district attorney in the nation, serving in that office in Eureka County in 1918. The bank was the only bank in Nevada to stay open during the bank holiday of 1933 during the Depression. Banks were ordered not to reopen after closing of a certain business day. This bank simply stayed open 24 hours a day until the holiday ended. Later, this bank became the First National Bank of Nevada in 1981, the First Interstate Bank of Nevada in 1996, Wells Fargo, and then Nevada State Bank. The Nevada State Bank business finally moved to a new location in 2016, and it's now a drugstore. All right, next one, please. Oh, never mind. Hold on a second. So the Owl Club, I want to talk about the Owl Club quickly first. It was originally a two-story structure. The CP Brewery was downstairs and the Business Palace Saloon was upstairs. One-story structure was built after the 1880 fire, and it has been used as a bar and cafe for many years. Your two choices in town to eat are the Owl Club and the Urban Cowboy, and then there's a small ice cream and pizza stand. The Rains Market, which is in the middle of this building and of this little movie, has been since moved out to the outskirts of town and become Rains Market and Ace Hardware. But the old Rains Market was actually two historical buildings. The southern portion of the building was known as the Bishop and Chamberlain building after its owners, who completed the brick structure in June of 1880. The earlier frame structure, like most of them, burned on March 16th, but the new brick building survived the August 1880 fire. F.J. Schneider's drugstore moved back into the new building and remained there until 1910. Another portion of the building has been used as Brown, Tassel and Company Shoe and Boot Store in 1880, a saloon in 1886, and an assay lab in 1890. In about 1929, the building became Kitchen Brothers Market, and the building was put up for sale and bought by the Rain family in 1973. The northern section was built in 1879 by W.J. Smith and Company as a saloon. And that building also survived the fire, and it was opened after the fire as the San Francisco Clothing Company. Survived the August 1880 fire, and wholesale market was sold in this portion of Rains Market in 1886 by W.J. Tonkin. It also featured a warehouse, a saloon, a men's clothing store, and an ocean store over the years. And from 1940s to 1978, it was the Eureka Drug and Fountain restaurant and soda fountain. The original Preston building can still be seen in this building. And as I said, it was open all the way until 2016. All right, next one, we're getting there. We're almost to the end here. EPAR building, I don't have much history on this one. Let's keep going. The Eureka Opera House. Eureka, Nevada is proud to have one of the best two restored and usable opera houses in the state. The other is the Piper's Opera House in Virginia City. The Eureka Opera House, built in 1880, when the population of the town was about 3,000, has always served as a gathering place. And during our lunch talk, a large part of the early part of Eric's discussion was about the tax money going into Eureka. And the fact that this building is in such good shape is in a large part due to that tax money that the county spent to preserve their mining heritage. Eureka Opera House today is a full-service convention center and cultural arts center. The building is used for convention, meetings, and community functions, as well as cultural presentation. Is open to the public for tours year-round. It has meeting, kitchen, and catering capacity. And this was going to be my lunch location for our tour. So that's another unfortunate casualty of having to do this in a virtual context. The Opera House was built on the ashes of the old Oddfellows Hall, which was destroyed by the Great Main Street Fire of August in 1879. The Opera House was used for the first time for New Year's Eve costume ball in 1880. On November 11th, the Eureka Daily Sentinel newspaper stated, "The building is, according to the plan of work now being carried on, to be thoroughly fireproof, built with masonry, brick and iron front, and slate roof. From the basement to the dome, the new theater will be furnished as none of the class has ever been in Eureka. Its arrangement is pronounced to be first class for ventilation, for heat, for means of egress in case of fire, and in fact, quote, 1,001 reasons it is bound to be a beneficial and permanent monument to the memory of those who have erected and who will do so soon elegantly furnish the same for the edification of our people." So Eureka was on the main tour circuit for opera and theater performances, and many famous personalities performed here during the town's heyday. Eureka Opera House served as a community auditorium showing anything of interest, including boxing, speeches, plays, graduations, and dances, including the annual Nob Hill Fire Company Masquerade Ball, held every year from 1880 until well into the 1900s. The first silent movie was shown there in 1915, and in the 1920s, the Opera House was changed into the Eureka Theater and talkie movies were presented. In 1923, a fire caused by a misplaced lantern described the oleo stage curtain that was originally hand-painted in Italy, unfortunately. But the curtain was replaced in 1924 with a new one painted in Minneapolis, featuring advertisement for local businesses. And the 1924 curtain still hangs at the front of the stage. The last movie was shown in 1958, and then the building fell into disrepair. Again, in reference to the mining taxes, the Eureka County acquired the structure and began a 3-year restoration. The Opera House was reopened in 1993, and the building received the 1994 Preservation Honor Award. Other historic elements inside include the original projectors from the early days of the silent movies, the first talkies projector, and a carbon arc spotlight, which are on display. And interestingly, historic graffiti has been preserved backstage from the early days, and the tradition has continued with signatures of the people who have performed at the Eureka Opera House since it reopened. Maintains a monthly schedule of cultural events as well as local events. Okay, the next slide, please. This is the Jackson House. It was built in 1877. It was gutted in the 1880 fire, but was rebuilt and operated until the 1890s and was advertised as the only fireproof hotel in Nevada. In 1907, it became the Brown Hotel and operated under that name for many years. In 1981, it was restored as a historical building and once again called the Jackson House, and it operates as a bar, restaurant, and hotel. And if you're going to stay at the Gold Country Inn and they're full, the overflow goes to the Jackson House. It operated in 2021. The Tourist Information Center is located downstairs. All right. I think we're getting pretty close to the end here. Next slide, please. We saw, oh, this is the side of it, just so you can get an appreciation for the three-dimensional aspect of the building. Okay, next slide. There's several interesting things around town. This is on the courthouse. It's a brass plaque, I guess, says it's the General Motors section of the Lincoln Highway Eureka unit, length 20 miles. That's a pretty rare antique that fortunately hasn't been stolen or destroyed over time. All right, next. This one's kind of interesting, but I'm gonna skip over it. The second story collapsed in an earthquake. You can see that currently the trees are taking over the inside of the building. Next. Some mining artifacts. Next. Okay, you got a glimpse of this early on in this presentation, but this is crew car 29. This is the only piece of rolling stock left in Eureka County from the Eureka and Palisade Railroad. Once thriving railroad began in 1875 when businessmen formed a railroad company and sold stock to wealthy San Francisco bankers who made their fortune from the Comstock mines in Virginia City. The narrow gauge railroad was built to haul refined ore from the Eureka smelters and several other mining camps some 80 miles to Palisade, where it connected with the main line of the Transcontinental Central Pacific Railroad. This crew car was used as sleeping quarters for the men working on the rail line. The first train of the Eureka and Palisade Railroad arrived in October 1875. The railroad was revived in 1912 and surprisingly ran until 1938. When the construction of the Eureka and Palisade Railroad began in 1874, Palisade became the headquarters for the railroad where it met the Central Pacific. By 1878, 31 million pounds of ore had been shipped through Palisade. And when the railroad folded, only a handful of people were left and the post office closed and Palisade became a ghost town. All right, finally. Next slide, please. There's probably, well, that's a picture of the railroad in operation. I'm not sure where that was taken. A little blurry, but clearly 1800s type of photograph. Okay, next. This is the Eureka County Courthouse. The Nevada legislature created Eureka County in 1873. Officials renovated a former ice rink donated by Judge John Odaro to serve as the first county courthouse. Not sure how that ice rink might have played into that building. A fortified jail and fireproof vault were added to the 40 by 100-foot wooden building. Oh, I guess this explains it. After fire destroyed the building, officials became concerned about their wooden courthouse and accepted plans for a more formidable structure. County hired a fellow named Ryland to construct the courthouse. He withdrew from the project shortly after the completion of the exterior, after which point Kodasarian finished the interior. A fellow named Mr. Witten supervised the construction, and McNally of Hawkins of San Francisco provided the heating and plumbing. The construction began in 1879 and was completed in 1880. The building was added to the already existing jail, which remained in use throughout the 1980s, of all things. Construction of the courthouse cost $38,000. It was designed in a modest Italianate, turn-of-the-century style, but additional expenses for a vault and other fixtures brought the price to $50,000. The brick two-story structure measures approximately 50 by 80 feet and stands 51 feet high. The second-story balcony supported by brackets rests over the main entrance there that you can see. Exterior accents include brick pilasters that rise to a metal bracketed cornice and a parapet wall with detailed brickwork. The whole town and this building also exhibits large iron shutters adjacent to the windows and doors of the courthouse, which protected the buildings from fires. Interior details consist of an imported Spanish cedar judge's bench and balustrade and gilded accents throughout. Two of the original walk-in safes are still usable. The doors are 6 inches thick iron with lovely summer scenes painted on them. The second floor courtroom is recognized as the best preserved in Nevada. It measures 45 square feet with a 19-foot high ceiling of pressed metal. A suspended gallery at the rear provides seating for 100 people. And a semicircular witness box placed in front of the judge's bench is distinctive because of its shape and unusual location. When it was completed, it was the finest courthouse in the state of Nevada outside of Virginia City, and is still one of the two 19th century courthouses still in use today, and the other one being the one in Virginia City. There's two large bells, one of which I have a picture of. They were rung as fire alarms by two of Eureka's several volunteer fire companies. One was cast in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the other in San Francisco. Each bell was identified by its tone. Okay, let's see the next slide. I think it's the bell. Eureka bell. All right, next. And that was the annex, which was a red brick building with iron columns built in 1880 and used as a wholesale liquor store. One of the early banks was located here, and later in the bank was moved down the street to the corner. And then this spot, okay, that's it. I think that's it. Next slide. Let's make sure. I think there's one more. Yeah, there's many interesting activities put on in Eureka during the summer. The weekend after we took these pictures, they had the Nevada All-Time Fiddlers contest. Fortunately, didn't make it. They've just started this new Eureka Gold Rush Games, which is features mining contests and other interesting activities such as a barbecue and picnic. And then they have a big show and shine as well in Eureka. So if you choose to visit, you can organize your trip maybe around one of these local functions and get more bang for your traveling buck. All right, that's it now. And thanks everyone for your patience. And thanks for allowing me to give you this tour.